Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Aerobility Inspirability talks. So I'm at a different angle today because I had a laptop failure working for an IT company in my day job. Probably this isn't my finest hour, but I'm doing this through my phone. I'm plugged in to some electricity and also onto the Wi-Fi. So what could possibly go wrong? So you know, it's been a few weeks since we've had the Inspirability talks, which we've been bringing to you now for well over 17 months. And it's obviously a way of keeping us all connected at Aerobility, but also the wider community. These are available as a podcast on Spotify and Apple Music, so you can listen to these at your leisure. So if this is 6 months or 12 months on from, what are we, the 23rd of June, 2021, we've had a pretty decent run of weather, haven't we, for flying, and weekends not looking too shabby, but we are very much in the midst of the summertime, and I hope everybody is getting their flying hours in. So I'm really delighted this evening to welcome a fellow Aerobility colleague to this evening's Inspirability talk. Now, the reason we've had a bit of a pause on these talks is because we had a great project that we delivered at Aerobility at the end of last month called the Armchair Airshow. And I'm sure many of you hopefully would have tuned in, but if you weren't able to on the day, you can still view that event on YouTube or Facebook. It really was a fantastic experience for those of us who were involved in the delivery of that project, but hopefully also for you who were suitably entertained. And Liz and I worked together on that. Of course, I'm talking about my colleague, Liz McConaghy. And we're going to talk today to Liz about her career in the Royal Air Force, and in particular, a record that she still holds, which is 17 years in the Royal Air Force on the Chinook force. And she's the longest serving female of any rank, of any role, on that aircraft type. So a phenomenal record there. We're going to hear all about Liz's experiences in the Royal Air Force. But perhaps I should just let you all know a bit about Liz before we get going. So Liz grew up in Northern Ireland. You'll hear that from her accent. And she joined the Royal Air Force in 2001, age 19, 10 days after 9/11, which had a defining, course for her career in the Royal Air Force, which we'll hear about. She only ever wanted to fly the Chinook, and she fulfilled her ambition by joining the Royal Air Force and getting through her training to step into the Chinook force. Initially, her first tour was on 27 Squadron at Odium, where she toured the world, and then moved on to 18 Squadron, where she wrapped up a phenomenal 10 operational deployments in support of Op Herrick. That was the operation in Afghanistan, of course, which we all know about. We'll hear some incredible stories about life as a crewman on the Chinook aircraft, what it's like to be flying that on that aircraft and doing what Liz did, saving lives, literally saving lives, and making sure that the Allied effort was brought straight to the enemy. And I can't think of any other role in the Royal Air Force where you really do get as close as Liz did on a number of occasions, and we're going to hear about that. In fact, she does joke about raising the normality bar every time that she went back on deployment, finding the most horrific of experiences that any of us would find terrible, but for her became almost normal. So again, we'll hear about some of those unique experiences on the front line. But in 2010, Liz became a qualified helicopter crewman instructor, a QHCI, and then saw out her days doing that back home at Odium before coming to Aerobility, joining her second family. And we'll hear about the role that Liz undertakes at Aerobility, delivering a very exciting project, Project Able, which is going to be really expanding and growing the operations that we undertake at Aerobility. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to my good friend, Liz McConaghy. Are you there?
Hi, John. How are you?
Yes, very well, thanks. Very well. And what have you been getting up to then, apart from recovering from the Armchair Airshow?
Well, I was actually at Blackbush yesterday and then just working from home today. Got my fingers in lots of pies for Aerobility at the minute, so it's a bit non-stop. But yeah, I was just smiling the whole way through your introduction. It always makes me smile looking back at my career because it was quite colourful and every day was different. So I'm looking forward to telling some stories about it.
And I can't wait to hear those stories either, because you know, being an aviation enthusiast myself, I just know how important an asset the Chinook is to the Royal Air Force and the role of the Royal Air Force. But perhaps more importantly, it's the people, isn't it? You know, and what they do in actually turning that lump of metal into an operational task for all sorts of reasons around the world.
Absolutely, John. I mean, the Chinook family is just that. It's a family. We wouldn't be able to do the stuff we do in the air if it wasn't for the engineers getting the aircraft ready, fixing snags on start just before we go flying to get us airborne. And certainly out in Afghanistan, they are just absolutely instrumental to everything we do. So it's a huge team effort. It's not just the aircrew and it's certainly not just the pilot sat in the cockpit. It's just a massive, team on the aircraft, team on the ground.
Yeah, sure. And what I'd like to do is just wind the clock back, if I can, to your love affair with the Chinook. So how did it start for you then, Liz? Was there aviation in your family at all?
Well, no, not really, John. My elder brother, he joined the army a year actually before I joined the RAF. And I mean, growing up in Northern Ireland, used to see helicopters over the sky all the time. Originally, it was the Wessex over Newtonard's Airshow, and then Chinooks and Pumas, obviously, as well. And I always said to my mom, I want the kind of job that if I was ever on a game show, and I said what I did, people would go, oh, that's unusual. What's that job? Not just like a banker or an accountant or a lawyer, something really unique. So when my brother joined the army, I went with him when he did his entrance test up at a place called Palace Barracks back home in Northern Ireland. And while I was waiting for him to finish his exam, there was a magazine in the office, the CEO's office, and it had a picture of a guy hanging out the side of a helicopter on what I thought was a rope. So I said to the guy in the office, what's this job? It looks pretty cool. And he said, oh, that's actually helicopter crewman. And I was like, oh, and he's hanging on a rope. And he said, no, that's a wire. And I was like, oh, so how did you find out how to do this then? And he told me a little bit about it. And I was absolutely sold. Yeah, that was me off on that time.
Well, okay. And you told me about your, grammar school days and that sort of thrust of the teachers and that environment to move you into, perhaps what some people might term as a, profession, regarding, whatever it might be, law or medicine, but you weren't having any of that, were you?
No, and we had I went to a place called Regent House Grammar School back home. We had an amazing cadet force, funny enough, but I never joined the cadet force because I played hockey and you could do one or the other. You didn't really have time for both. So yeah, I bobbed along, did my A-levels, but it was during my A-levels that I went with my brother when he joined up, and that was when I started to do all my entrance stuff for the RAF. And yeah, a lot of the teachers at the time said, you're never going to amount to anything if you don't get a degree and you don't go and fill in your LCAS or UCAS form or whatever it was at the time. And when I eventually got accepted into the RAF, which was during my A-levels, it was pretty hard to kind of concentrate on doing those whenever I knew that I was potentially starting the best career ever. So, but yeah, a few years later, I managed to take a Chinook in there while we were in Northern Ireland tasking. And all the teachers that I did see who I knew from previous came over and said, it's so good to have you in today just to show that you don't need a degree. And it had really changed the mindset of that, to say you don't need to go to, university, get a degree in something just to fill the time. Just follow your dreams and you can make it if you try.
Wow. Yeah. Well, what a story. And I do really agree there that, some people don't have a dream to follow and they might just meander their way into a career that turns into into a lifelong role in a profession. But it was very clear that you had something that you were very firmly fixed on and you managed to build that. So So
I felt very lucky having that, because I do think you're right. I think there's a lot of kids out there who just don't know what they want to do. But all I'd say to them is, if you see a cool job, and whether or not that is someone hanging off the side of a building or someone at an air show in a fast jet, never think that anything is beyond your dreams. Because when I was, 17, the idea of hanging out the side of a Chinook or hanging off the ramp of a Chinook, I barely even knew what a Chinook was. I just knew it was a helicopter, and I just went for it. And if you haven't got a plan B, lots of parents will be switching off now saying, oh, don't listen to her. But I didn't have a plan B. It was all I ever wanted to do. And I think because I didn't have a plan B, really, I just kept pushing and pushing and going for it. And so kids, find the coolest job ever and just go and do it.
Yeah. And now we've heard on these podcasts about the path in for pilot. But how about the path in for your role, Liz, which was crewman? What did that involve?
So it's changed slightly now, but whenever I went through, you did an initial interview, which again for me was back up at Palace Barracks. And whenever I pulled in there to get my car pass, a Chinook went over the top of me at 20 feet. And that was the actual moment where I looked up and thought, that is it. That is what I want to do. So you do an interview there, and then providing you pass that, they will recommend you off to Cromwell. So you go over to OASC, which is Officer Aircrew Selection training at Cromwell, which is the same as the pilots. So you're all lumped in together. You do your aptitude tests, you do an interview, you do lots of command tasks, which are like basically little challenges, like get through the lava pit with a bucket of water, or a bucket and a couple of sticks or poles, and a fitness test. And then providing you do all that, you get through all that to the next stage, you'll do a medical as well. So a lot of the results that come out of that, certainly the aptitude test and the medical, will define where you want to go. And they look at everybody as pilot initially, and then stream you down from there. So I actually got the aptitude for navigator, but my arms were 2 centimeters too short. So which is ironic, because even if they'd have offered me navigator, I still would have said, no, I want to be a crewman. So it's a big combination. And then when you get accepted onto a course, then off you go, start your basic training. For me, as a crewman, started my basic training at Cromwell. It's slightly different now, and I think the basic recruits go straight to Halton. And then they're in one big branch, which is a weapon systems operator. So you can go to lots of different platforms now. But in my day, it was just Loadmaster was the brevet. And you could go to either fixed wing on Hercs or C-17s weren't around at the time, so it was Hercs and the shiny fleet, as we call them, or onto helicopters. So you just had to keep filling in the dream sheet and saying, where do you want to go? And mine always said, Chinook, Chinook, Chinook.
So did you have much influence then? Or did it just depend on that year's intake as to what they needed? Or
yeah, it really did. You obviously, at the end of each section of each course, you could say they gave you a dream sheet. So the initial streaming was at the end of ground school at Cromwell, whether or not you wanted to go fixed wing or rotary. And I absolutely wanted to go rotary. So it's a case of service need. There was, I think, 3 people in my course went to fixed wing, and the other 9 of us maybe went off to rotary. And then you go to Shawbury, and that's the first time you step inside a helicopter, which is... for us, it was a Griffin, which is basically like a Huey helicopter, for what you guys would know. But you do your 9-month course at Shawbury, and then at the end of that, they give you another little dream sheet, and you say, where would you like to go? Would you like to go to Chinooks, or at the time Merlins, Pumas, or search and rescue? Because that was the options we had back in the day when I joined. And again, I was option A, Chinook, option B, Chinook. But it's very much service needs. So actually at the time, I got rolled to Merlin aircraft and spent most of my roll disposal nearly crying into my pint. But then found out a few hours later that because the Merlins were so far behind, I was actually going to be going Chinooks. So literally saved by the skin of my teeth.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all service need. But you can't absolutely influence it, but you can certainly try.
Sorry, Liz, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry. The joys of being on a phone. So no, I did get all of that, and that's I guess right place, right time, isn't it? So that was that was really good. So in terms of the Chinook aircraft, just tell us about what it does, its role in the Royal Air Force, and I think, you know, all of us just want to know, is there anything it can't do? I mean, it just seems a versatile machine.
Yeah, there's not a lot it can't do, to be honest. It's pretty good. Can't fit in very small places, but otherwise it can pretty much do everything. So we refer to the helicopter fleet in the Royal Air Force as the support helicopter fleet. So SH, that's the term that we use. And the Chinook is the basically heavy lift element of that. And as you can tell from the size of them flying around the sky, they're pretty big, and they're pretty big inside as well. So we can fit inside anything up to 40 troops, because we can fit them along the sidewall seats, and we can also put seat belts on the floor. So if out in Afghanistan, for example, if we have to put as many troops on the ground in one go, we would fit those seats on the floor, or those seat belts on the floor, and just absolutely jam the aircraft full of troops. We can fit underslung loads underneath, and actually that picture you've just brought up, if you look really closely in that dust cloud, there is a strop hanging underneath the aircraft. So we can fit stuff on the centre hook. We can fit up to 9 tons in the centre hook, and then 5 tons. We've actually got a forward and an aft hook as well. So we can do underslung loads around the place. So basically, if it won't fit inside, we'll put it underneath in an underslung load. And we can also fit some smaller loads inside as well. So we can move Land Rovers around, motorbikes, 105 guns. So yeah, as long as it fits through the door at the back, we can pretty much take it. And if it's too heavy, we'll put it underneath.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you saw the news today, but well, I'm sure you know this fact, that the Chinook celebrates its 40th year in the Royal Air Force this year, which is just phenomenal. And we're ordering more, aren't we? We're ordering the extended range Chinooks now, which is I just you know, a credit to the design, really, and it's just almost seems like a timeless machine. And you know, and I remember, if I'm not mistaken, is it Bravo November, the airframe that have been everywhere and done everything? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it has indeed. Bravo November is made its day in the Falklands, and it's a very famous aircraft that has been obviously on all the ops since then. It's actually got a little plaque. If you ever get to see it in Airshow, folks, go inside, and there's a little plaque screwed on the base of where the cockpit is. That just sort of just a nice little memory plaque about what it did in the Falklands. But yeah, it's still standing the test of time, and it's good to hear that we're actually ordering some more, because what I would say about the Chinook, it's like having an amazing old style camper van that people keep bolting brand new like GPS onto and all these fancy things, because ultimately the aircraft itself is very old. It still leaks like a sieve. It's just always covered in oil and hydraulics. But we've got a lot of new Gucci kit and a lot of it's glass cockpit now. So, but ultimately it's still the same airframes that we had 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a beast.
So when you say it fulfills the role of a support helicopter, what does that actually mean then? I mean, we'll come on to your experiences operationally, you know, as you were doing things, you know, on task. But, you know, is that supporting the Army, the Navy? I mean, is it just anything and everything? I mean, obviously we've seen disaster relief that it's done at home. You know, what's that support helicopter role in terms of its operational service?
So we generally do work for the Army. Ultimately, the Army go and exercise, the Army train to go and fight wars, and we do a lot of the training with them. So, I mean, the BBC are fairly famous for calling us Army Chinooks, which always used to wind all of us up. But no, we are actually owned by the RAF. Yeah, but the Armies are basically our primary customer. We do go on boats quite a lot. So I've done a lot of time on HMS Ocean, doing operations with the Combined Helicopter Force down there with the Navy. And taking the Marines ashore for assaults ashore, things like that. But closer to home in the UK, we do a lot of disaster relief, like you've seen. We do a lot of flood relief, where we can undersling sandbags into areas. Further afield, we've done a lot of sort of NEOs, where we evacuate refugees, take them out of country. When the earthquakes in Pakistan, 27 Squadron were involved in a lot of the relief aid for that. So it's kind of just whatever falls on the doorstep of Odium, which is usually on a Friday night at about 5 o'clock. And it's everyone back into work and do a rapid plan to go somewhere and hopefully make a difference, because that's what we're about. You know, it's about making a difference to the people that either need saving, need food, need moved. We do that. We make a difference.
Yeah. Now, so we know what the what the airframe does and its role. Tell us about the role that you had as a helicopter crewman.
Okay, so crewman's quite a unique role. We are basically the eyes and the ears of the pilot. So at the front, you will have two pilots, and imagine that they are now flying a really long bus. So it's 99 feet long, the Chinook. So they can't really see what's going on behind them a lot of the time. And certainly when we come to pick up those undersung loads that you saw in that previous picture, they don't know when they're directly overhead, wherever they're picking up. So our main role is to voice marshal the aircraft around the skies and into landing sites. So we practice in the UK picking up undersung loads. We practice landing on sloping ground. We practice taking the aircraft into things called confined areas, which are slightly smaller landing sites. And obviously we have to make sure that we're clear of all trees and obstructions and wires. And we are basically the eyes and the ears and the safety bubble for the pilots. We also then do all the internal loading. So anything that comes over that ramp, it's our job to work out the where the CFG of the aircraft's going to be, how to restrain whatever we've got on board properly, so that if we have a heavy landing, it's not going to go anywhere. And we also do all the safety of the troops. So when we get the troops on board, we load them. And certainly when you're in Afghanistan and you've got 40 of them to load, it's quite a skill to get them all to sit down and facing the right way with all their kit. There we go. So as you can see, it's usually slightly more organized than that, but we absolutely fill that aircraft up. So that's kind of the crewman's main role, really. And of course, we do a little bit of navigation when the pilots are a bit busy at the front, or when they get lost and hand the navigation back to us. We also do the radios, and certainly out in Afghanistan, we do a lot more of the radios. We do the TAC radio back to the ops room. And when the 9-liners are coming in for the MERT missions, we control all the 9-liners that come through and feed that into the cockpit. And obviously, the highlight of the job we get to do as a crewman is man the weapons. So we've got two miniguns fitted on the Chinook at the front, which are 3,000 rounds a minute of 7.62 caliber bullets. And we have one at the ramp as well, which is an M60, which is a very old American weapon that they use in the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
But yeah, picture of the minigun there.
So in your role to man the guns, what I say your role, what would be the role of that particular mission then? Is that just to protect yourselves? Is it to protect those on the ground if there's no firepower in the area? I mean, give us some sort of perspective on why you're carrying those weapons and what their job is.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that, actually, John, because having a weapon requires a huge amount of responsibility. Whenever we were in Afghanistan at the start, it wasn't as kinetic, or I say the word kinetic, but for anyone watching, that means it wasn't as dangerous as it got to throughout 2007, 8, 9. It got very, very dangerous. So the rules of engagement that we initially went out on were self-defense. So basically, we used that weapon, and any weapons in the aircraft were purely to defend our aircraft and anyone on board. So I guess the easiest way to say it is if someone shoots at me, I shoot back. When it got really, really dangerous in Afghanistan, they changed the rules of engagement slightly so that you could almost not preempt if someone was going to shoot at you, but if it was pretty obvious someone was holding an RPG on their shoulder, you could shoot them before they shot the RPG. So it sort of escalated a little bit, and then it came back to self-defense. But I've always said, whenever you pull that trigger, you've got to live with the consequences of it for the rest of your life. So, certainly the Americans can be a bit more gung-ho than us. But I always said to my crews and my junior crewmen that ultimately you've got to think very carefully before you pull the trigger, but also not be scared to pull the trigger, because it has saved many crews out there. But it's certainly not I wouldn't say it's a Taliban hunting device. It is purely there to protect our aircraft.
Yeah.
And everyone on board.
Yeah. Well, so talking of, these sorts of operational aspects, back to your career path, Liz, then. So you've got through training and you've gone on to your first Frontline Squadron. So tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so I started on 27 Squadron, and at Odium there is 7 Squadron, which is a Special Forces Squadron, which requires generally a little bit more experience to go to. So people back in my day never really used to go there straight away when they came off the operational conversion flight, or basically the Chinook school. And then the other side of the airfield, we had 2 squadrons, 27 Squadron and 18 Squadron, absolutely identical in what they do, just slightly different colours and motifs. And obviously different people in each squadron. So I went to 27 for my first 3-year tour, which was great because I got to go down to the Falklands in 2003. I then came back from that and did a workup for my first Iraq tour, and it was just slightly after the war, so things had calmed down slightly. But I got to do 2 deployments to Iraq with 27 Squadron. And then on the back of that comes all the training that we have to do to be able to go to those places. So we went to Morocco for a lot of dust training and mountain landings. We did the same in Italy, which was amazing. And yeah, you sort of deploy around the globe doing training to then get you ready to go to places like Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was on 27 Squadron where I got combat ready as well, which is basically you do. Imagine when you come off the school, you've got your L plates on and you're still kind of learning your trade. So you would take maybe up to about a year in those days to get your combat ready check. And then once you're combat ready, you're good to go. Off you go. So, yeah.
And tell us your, your feelings on the way out of the Falklands, because that's really when you were putting into practice all that training. You're kind of on your own. You don't want to let your colleagues down or sort of embarrass yourself. I mean, what were you doing in the Falklands? I mean, obviously we know what the UK government's stance is in the Falklands, but what was the actual role of the aircraft out there?
Well, thankfully, the bosses of the squadrons aren't stupid, and they know that it's better to send us to slightly more benign places before they send us straight out to places like Iraq. So the Falklands at the time when I went was very much just moving freight and people around the island, because you can't really go many places in the Falklands by road. So you end up having to put everything inside the Chinook. So we are kind of the rock stars down there because everyone loved us, because if they sweet talked the Chinook crew, they could come out with us for the day and sit on the ramp and do a bit of ramp riding around the islands. But yeah, it was a lot of underslung loads, and a lot of the resupply for the Falklands comes from a boat that used to be called the Brandon. So we would do a lot of underslung load lifting off that back onto the mainland. So you really, really hone your skills of your voice marshalling. And we always work in the aircraft to a thing called 10-foot MSC, which is basically your minimum safety clearance around the aircraft. But down in the Falklands, we had special dispensation for 5-foot MSC because of the aerial on the Brandon boat. So you used to get very, very close to this aerial. So everyone had to be on their game. But it was really good just to get those basic skills all good without anyone shooting at you, which is always a bonus.
So you obviously get that experience under your belt, and then you've got your baptism of fire, which you've already mentioned, Iraq. So I mean, how did that feel? I mean, how do you get out there? Obviously you can't fly the Chinook out there, can you?
Yeah, we the Chinooks are sent out by the AT fleet, which is sort of the big aircraft at the time. I think it was C-17s they were put in and flown out. We went on a thing called a TriStar, which are out of service now. But again, that comes back to the shiny fleet, which is basically just like a BA, take you on holiday type aircraft. But smells the most awful smell for some reason. Always stays with me, that smell. But yeah, I was excited to go because everyone in the squadron, whenever I joined 27, obviously when you're getting ready to get your combat ready tick, the guys already on the squadron would be going out to Iraq to do their deployments and coming back and being in the crew room and having their tea at lunchtime or whatever. And they'd all be talking about landing sites and about stuff they'd picked up and about just war dates. And for us new guys, we just could not wait to get out the door and to go and, feel like part of the team. So it was really exciting going for the first time. I just couldn't wait to, and it was all very novel. It was like finally going to war. And I was only 21 at the time. So I was the youngest aircrew to ever deploy there. And I was still limited combat ready when I went the first time. So yeah, it was all bright lights, big city.
Yeah, sure. And what was it? How were you billeted? What was the messing like? Just give us a flavour of life in a war zone, Liz.
Yeah, so Basra was really well set up. It was tent city. So all of us stayed in these big sort of C-span tents, and you'd go into a main tunnel and there'd be about 4 or 5 rooms off the main corridor, which were the accommodation rooms, and then a shower room as well and a laundry room. So it was really well set up in that respect. And the first time I went, I ended up having to stay in the female accommodation block, which was tent, which was slightly further away from our tent. And it was just awful because I just didn't feel part of the team. Every time we had a short notice mission, they had to come and try and find me, and if I wasn't there, they didn't know where I was. So the second time I went, I was able to stay in the actual lads' tent with them, and that's how I always went from there on after. So there'd be maybe 8 to 10 of us in a room, and we had our little cot bed, and we had basically like a tent pod thing that like went around your cot bed that was made of mesh just to stop mosquitoes getting in. And that was your space. So all your kit, everything you had for your 2 months lived in that little pod with you inside an even bigger tent. And then the mess hall where we got our food was literally opposite that. So you'd wake up straight across there for some food. We had a gym in the next tent along. And then even better than that, we had a Pizza Hut. So what more could you want? We had a really good Pizza Hut, and we got things called Paradigm phone cards. So you could phone home for 20 minutes a week. You could call back home on your Paradigm card from a little porta cabin. So do you know what? It wasn't that bad. Apart from the heat, it was pretty warm.
No, I'm sure it was. And that wasn't, to use the words you said before, that wasn't as kinetic as Afghanistan became, was it? That was sort of towards the end of hostilities. So what was the role of the Chinook force in Iraq at the time?
So a lot of the stuff we were doing was Eagle VCPs, where we would put some troops on the back, mostly the RAF regiment, take them in somewhere to a road, drop them off, and they would do search and stop with vehicles. Stop and search, the other way around. And they would just to see if there was any weapons being moved, that kind of thing. Very similar to what happened at like sort of Northern Ireland era, going back 30 years. So it was mostly peacekeeping. It was very much just trying to keep on top of any underlying stuff that was going on. And we also held what in those days was called IRT, which is Immediate Response Team, which is just the med cover for any British troops in the area. And that was held from a place slightly further north than Basra called Al-Amara. And again, it was just a building, sort of almost shelled out building that we lived in with the medics and some of the force protection guys in there, and just, you know, watched the series 24 back to back and playing chess and things like that, and kind of, because there wasn't that many IRT shouts back in the day. It was nice and quiet.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, we've got this direction of travel we're seeing now. You know, you've sort of been let into it gently in the Falklands, and then, you know, you go to Iraq where it gets a bit serious, but then of course Afghanistan comes along, you know, I was just reading here some of the notes that we shared previously, Liz. You know, 10 operational deployments in support of Op-Herrick. You know, and I'm sure that's the majority of your memories on the Chinook force. Just give us a little bit of context around Op-Herrick and, you know, what was going on out there.
Yeah, so Op-Herrick started for the Chinook force in 2005. So we literally pulled out of Iraq, and 4 months later, we were straight into Afghanistan. So we never really had any breathing space as a fleet to kind of rest and recover. It was just straight out the door to another dusty, hot place with some baddies. But initially, it was very much to stop the poppy trade, because the poppy trade out there then obviously led to the opium trade that was coming back to the UK. So a lot of the stuff we were trying to do was basically eradicate the poppy fields with the British troops that were on the ground, and we were there to support that mission. So 2005, 2006 weren't too bad initially, but from 2006 onwards, as we started to push up the Helmand Valley, that's when Afghanistan started to get very kinetic. So our initial sites when the Chinook force were operating in Afghanistan, we flew into Kandahar, and we were all based from Kandahar. And I was lucky enough to see Bastion grow out of the ground. So when I first got to Kandahar on my first step, a lot of our missions daily would be to undersling ISO containers and aircraft just full of anything they needed to build Camp Bastion. So it was a case that the ramp would go down, and you'd be like, So there'd be like ladders, there'd be those cable rolls, there would be drums of oil, you name it, and we had to try and fit it in. And it's like playing a bad game of Jenga, just trying to make all this stuff fit in the back of the aircrafts. But we would undersling it down to Bastion, which was just a barbed wire fence to begin with, and a couple of tents. And we would then stay down there for a week at a time, holding the IRT again from there for some of the satellite, what we call FOBs, which is a forward operating base. But again, there wasn't that many of them at the time. There was Bastion being built. There was a camp slightly north called Garesh at the time. and a place called Lashkar. So that was our daily missions. We'd kind of go out, fly a little triangle around those sites, and then go back to Kandahar and shut down. But then as the time went on, the British forces pushed up the Helmand Valley, and we started to create more FOBs. So Sangin, these are all places that people will have heard of on the news. So there's Sangin, Musakala, Kajaki was a place far, far north where there was a reservoir. And as we put more and more British troops into the ground and tried to take the ground, well, it's inevitable and more when you're trying to take ground from people who don't want you to. There were more bullets flying and therefore more casualties. So as it went on, it got a lot more kinetic.
Yeah. And before we go into, some of your more dramatic experiences and memorable experiences, really operating under fire, just help us to understand what it means to share the hardship with those around you that you operate with, and because it's a family, isn't it? I mean, people very often talk about not wanting to let your colleagues down. You're part of a team. Just help us to understand that. Because you're in a hostile environment, doing something which is about as unsafe as you could get, and yet you're relying on each other, aren't you?
Yeah, very much so. What I'd say is a lot of people, certainly the Chinook fleet and the crewmen I've worked with, we're always on limited crews. So when you deploy to Afghan, if you don't go, if you pull a sickie, as you want to call it, somebody else goes in your place. And I think most of us could never live with the idea of somebody else going out there and potentially taking a bullet that was meant for you. Sounds harsh, but that's the way we always look at it. You have to pull your weight. You have to pitch up when you're called upon. And yeah, when we get out there, we're in a constituted crew. So you get to know your crew really, really well, which can be a blessing or it can be a curse, depending on who you're crewed with. But because of that, you almost get so good at operating together that you can fly a mission without really even needing to speak sometimes. And there were lots of techniques we would use. For example, when we were lifting out of a landing site, we would click on the microphone twice so we knew the pilots would basically be telling us that they were lifting, and we knew instantly that's what was happening. So you could minimize all the chat on the intercom so that you could hear more information coming on the radio. So it was almost like, Star Wars using the Force, but we all knew exactly what we were doing. And the same in the tents. We all lived together, went to the gym together. They became my absolute best mates, and they still are to this day. Yeah.
Now we'll come on to the MERT missions a little bit later. I want to leave that to the end for good reason, and people would understand why. But in terms of what you were doing, Liz, in support of the frontline troops, just tell us what the kind of a typical tasking would be then.
Yeah, so we would have 2 Chinooks on the tasking line daily. So they would get a tasking sheet in the day before, and that was almost like a bus schedule of what needed to go from A to B to C to D, back to B, back to C, pick up these people from A again and go out. And our job was basically to try and make that plan fit around the easiest way to get everyone everywhere. So you would have a list of packs that you were moving or underslung loads that needed to be taken out. And it could be anything from going to get troops for to come back to the UK for their R&R, so the rest and recovery or recuperation and recovery. So they'd come and get their 2 weeks back in the UK. So we'd go and get those guys, bring them back from the FOBs. We would take all their food rations out, ammunition, water, whatever those guys needed, we would take out to them. And then obviously a lot of the personnel would change over. There'd be a thing called a RIP, which is a relief. And there we go. I think it was Christmas time. Christmas time is horrendous in Afghanistan because all you move are bags and bags and bags of post. And we had to block up all the windows so that none of the bags would go flying out the windows. But when there's a RIP on, which is relief in place for maybe one of the battalions are moving out of theatre and the other guys, so say, for example, the Marines are swapping out, coming home to the UK, and the Paras are going to Afghan, we would then have to move all of those guys. So it went on for about 2 weeks. But it's great. I mean, I used to put the ramp down and guys from the FOBs. I mean, Bastion wasn't so bad because it was a main operating base. So we would get fresh salad maybe once a week at the start and fresh fruit, that kind of thing. Whereas the guys in the FOB were literally living on rations for months on end. So the best thing ever was to be able to put the ramp down and go, here's a bag of blueies, which were the letters from people at home, and here's a box of oranges. And that's where I think a lot of us take things for granted, like running water and fresh fruit. They hadn't seen fresh fruit in a month, and I suddenly hand them a box of oranges, and the smiles that you got back from that were just brilliant. So such a small thing, but delivering an orange to someone made a difference. And that's what I always loved about the Chinook, is that we made a difference to those people's days.
Yeah,
so that was normal kind of tasking, and then you would spend a couple of days on that, maybe a couple of days on IRT and just swap around, and then a couple of days on the duty crew, which fixed all the broken aircraft. And we had a lot of broken aircraft.
Yeah, no, and that job satisfaction, I can't think of much else really that just makes you sleep well at night, having done a day's work and made a huge difference to someone's life. So that's incredible. And one of the things that I found quite ironic is with my day job, I spent a lot of time at Bryce Norton at the two group.
I'm lucky for you.
And it was on the first floor, so I had to go through the terminal building and then into the office block there. And I would often drive home, getting my head around the fact that I would see a bunch of guys and the family looking very nervous, unsure, unhappy in some respects. And then the next flight would come in, and you'd see a bunch of guys return. And the relief and the happiness on the faces of those guys coming back in, and just the irony of being in in the Cotswolds, beautiful part of England, and then 9 hours later being in a war zone, and just grappling with that thought in my head was my little exposure to what you would have been exposed to. How do you cope, Liz, with going backwards and forwards, and of course, as each deployment wrapped up in your diary, you knew and understood, the risks, that were in front of you. I mean, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, you've summed the prize up really well, because it's almost like the gateway to hell for some of the ground soldiers, because they know what they're going into. But it's also like the scene at the end of Love Actually, that film where everyone's coming back in again. It's just, I mean, if you filmed 24 hours there back in the day, it would have been absolutely amazing to see the difference in emotion. But yeah, as I went out, like you said, it's sort of, I mean, I had the same bed space every time I went. It was just like, you'd land on originally it was the TriStars, and then it became C-17s. And when you land in theatre and the doors open, Afghanistan has this really distinct smell, and the smell of desert would just come in the door, and instantly you knew you were back. And then we'd all get loaded onto a little bus, and we'd be taking up the accommodation. And it was always in the depths of the night. So just that dry desert smell, it was so weird, but it almost felt so strangely familiar. It felt like home. And then it became so familiar. Just be straight into the tent. Is that me over there then? Yeah, okay, off you go, unpack your stuff. And I have to say, and I think most people who I know who are watching this will say the same, the journey out there is the worst bit. The day before you check in at Bryce, and that 24-hour period of when you're flying out there and arriving in theatre is the worst bit. But what you always find is, as soon as you unpack, your body naturally just goes, well, I'm here now. And you don't, not that you don't miss home, but you kind of just accept that you're there and you've got a job to do. So yeah, it did become quite relentless for a lot of guys towards the end. I still loved it. I'm just maybe a war junkie, but it was just nice to always have that purpose. So and we used to call it fat camp, because everyone used to pile on the pounds before they went, and then just go to the gym for 2 months and save a load of money.
Yeah. Now, talking about making a difference, Liz, I watched an incredible documentary, and I'm sure you know the one I mean. It was on a while ago now, but it gave people a fly on the wall insight into the medical emergency response teams, which of course were a part of the Chinook force in Afghanistan. And I was completely humbled, and really frankly just surprised about the real difference that you on those teams were making to the troops on the ground. Tell us what the MERT teams did, and perhaps give us some real life examples.
Yeah, so I've already referred to IRT a few times tonight, which was called the Immediate Response Team. When Afghanistan was started to really get busy, they changed the naming, so it was then renamed to the Medical Emergency Response Team, the MERT. So what we would do would be we would live at a slightly different tent to the main part of the deployment. So we would spend 48 hours on shift or 24 hours on shift. We would have some medics with us in the next tent along, and then some force protection soldiers in the third tent along. And we'd all live obviously within, and that was like within 10 meters of each other. And you were on response time 15 during the day and 30 at night time. So you couldn't go to the gym, you couldn't, I mean, even during the day, you couldn't have a shower during the RS-15 time. It was a case of you'd have to wait until we went on to RS-30 at night time, and then the routine was always shower, then bed. But we'd all go and eat together. We'd basically do everything together because we had a radio to be on call all the time. So the way a 9-liner would work was if the troops were out on the ground and there was a troops in contact, which we referred to as a tick, if anyone got injured, they would send in a 9-liner on the radio back to HQ, back at Bastion. And a 9-liner is a simple format that basically comes along the line of the call sign, if we've been injured, how many have been injured, what the injury is, or at least a Cat Alpha, Bravo, or Charlie. So Cat A would be the absolute worst injury. Cat B would be he's bad, but we're working with him and he's okay. Cat C would be walking wounded, so he's maybe tripped in a ditch or something or whatever, and he'd be able to walk on the aircraft. So, and we all the Americans had a very similar system, but it was T1 to 4. So we would the 9-liner would go into HQ, and as soon as HQ got hold of it, and it was a very specific format for that reason, which I'll come on to in a second. But as soon as HQ got that message, they would phone the phone that was in our room, in our accommodation, and we would basically, as soon as the phone rang, we knew what was coming, a 9-liner shout. So we would, 3 of the crew would run out to the aircraft, both the pilots and one of the crewmen, and the other crewman would stay behind and take down the details of the 9-liner. And sometimes it was very, very scarce information. It was a grid and it was the number of casualties, and we would just go and we'd get the rest of the information on the way there through the radio. So the last crewman, the 4th member of the crew, would get all that information and sprint out to the aircraft, by which time, I mean, the engineers would have sprinted out, the medics would be prepping all their kit in the back of the aircraft, the force protection guys would put their headsets on and checking in. And yeah, as you can see there, over the years, we had to put matting down because there was just so much blood, in some of the aircraft recoveries that we did with casualties. And all that kit that we had on board had a very specific place that had to sit on the aircraft. So the medics could find it and locate it at night time when they were working on maybe up to, 4 or 5 casualties down the back on stretchers. So everything was really precise with the MERT aircraft. We'd then get airborne and off we go. And like I said earlier, the 9-liners on a very specific format, so that if more information came on the radio and was stepped on by another radio message, as the crewmen who were receiving that information, we could almost piece together the missing bit of information. Even if you just heard, gunshot to the head, you'd know what part of the 9-liner that was. So, and the worst ones where you would get airborne and you would initially get airborne for, say, 1 Cat Bravo. So off you go. And then on the way there, you'd be like, another information would come through saying we now have 2 Cat Alphas and a Cat Bravo and a Cat Charlie. And when you're on your way to troops in contact and you're getting more and more casualties, that where you're headed is pretty much still in the middle of a gunfight. But not a single crew would ever even think twice about going. And if we ever had to be held off, it was usually either waiting for an Apache for top cover or for the COs of theatre would hold us off just because of risk mitigation. Because ultimately, if the Taliban were to take out Chinook, it would be obviously big kudos for them. So they had to protect us as an asset. So yeah, there you go. You can see when we landed on, the Taliban were a very clever enemy. So they used to booby trap a lot of the sites where we would routinely go to recover some of the troops. So the troops had to not only secure the landing site for us, but then obviously bring the casualties to us, get them over the ramp and then get them on board the aircraft. And yeah, it was, it was sometimes like MASH. Certainly in 2009, there was a specific op called Panther's Claw. And we were, I think I had 14 IRT shouts in one day. And it was just, load the casualty off at Nightingale was the HLS beside the hospital at Bastion. So we'd offload casualties, and another 9-liner would be coming through in the radio, or we'd be on our way into Bastion and 9-liners were already coming in on the radio. So it was just crazy. But what the medics did down the back of our aircraft was just phenomenal. I've seen them bring people back to life who have come on already, already taken their last breath, and they've brought them back to life. I've seen them, save limbs. It's just amazing what they can do, and they can do it in 50-degree heat at nighttime, just holding torches in their mouths, because we can't obviously put on the aircraft lights because of tactical considerations. So those people are superhumans, and I will always refer to them as our angels for what they did for our troops.
Yeah, that's just amazing. Amazing to hear this. This is these are extreme environments you're working in and you're operating in. However many years on we are now from Afghanistan and your personal experiences, how have you come to terms with those experiences of the worst that humans can offer and the best that humans can offer? How have you sought support? Have you just relied and fallen back on your comrades and your friends, or doesn't it affect you? I mean, I'm really interested to understand, what an experience or experiences like that mean for you personally. Yeah.
Well, I always refer to my time in Afghanistan as the worst of times and the best of times, because it has absolutely given me the best memories and the best stories, I guess. I feel very privileged to have been part of that campaign, and the Chinook was one of the main cogs in that whole campaign. But it was the worst of times, like you say. I mean, seeing one of my worst, bloodiest days, I guess, was where the Rifles lost 5 guys in one go, and they all got brought on the aircraft on stretchers, and each and every one of them had a different flag on top of the bodies. So we had a Union Jack flag, we had a Rifles flag, I think it was a Man United flag, and a Liverpool flag, and a Welsh one maybe was the 5th one. But they were carried on the aircraft and set down, and watching their other colleagues, they'd kneel down and touch the bodies before they then got off the aircraft and went back into the fight. And that for me was a really hard thing to take away. Just the kind of like the gap that it leaves in a bunch of really close-knit lads. I mean, if we ever were, touch wood, to lose a Chinook, 4 people would have just affected the whole wing forever. And for those guys to have lost 5 of their mates and then go back into the fight was just immense. But so that's always something that's really stayed with me, and I find it really hard to see flags now. Flags always sort of trigger me a little bit. And the rest of the time, we really did try, I think, as crews, to try and just distance yourself a little bit from some of the guys we were picking up who had already, been killed. But I remember one of my very early days picking up a young Marine who'd been killed, called Marine Curry, and he came on the back of the aircraft in a bivvy bag, sadly, that was taped up with his name and rank on the top of it. And we didn't think anything of it, but you just try to treat it as a very valuable piece of freight. So we would bring that back to Bastion, and then it would, his body would get moved on through the repatriation through Bryce Norton and all that. But about 3 years later, I was reading the Sunday papers one morning and just burst out crying. And my partner at the time said, "What's happened?" And I said, "I knew that guy." And there was a story in the Times, I think, that was written about his fiancée, and he'd proposed just before he'd gone out to theatre. And suddenly there was a story behind the person. So what was in that bag was now a person, and there was a whole story behind it. And that really affected me quite badly as well. So, but when you're in, you've got all those people to bounce those stories off, and you've still got all your colleagues. And I have to admit, coming out where you don't have those people every day to kind of talk through stuff, it was really tough, really, really tough. And I think my sense of purpose when I left the RAF as well, you don't have that, put the batsuit on every day and go and do what you're absolutely joined to do. And that's where Aerobility came in. Aerobility have 100% kind of made me feel like a team again and put their arms around me and give me that purpose back. And things like, even sitting in Aerobility and spinning war dits, it's really good to kind of get some of those stories out of your system, because they'll always linger and kind of bounce around in your head like a marble. So yeah, it's been tough. But there's lots of people out there to support us. So getting on with life.
Of course, yeah, and I'm just going to wind back 5 minutes there and say, yes, the medics were the angels, but Liz, the crew were part of the team achieving incredible things in the worst of circumstances. So, just hats off to you and those colleagues of yours that managed to achieve, really what was the unthinkable. Humbling to hear. So, and thank you for sharing those thoughts, because I do know that there's people listening that will be able to understand what you're talking about as well.
Yeah, or even coming back to the whole teamwork thing, our engineers as well, we would land after a particularly, messy IRT shout, and they would wash the aircraft out because it had blood all over the floor. They would do that for us. They would, some of them would just put their arm around you and give you a cuddle and just check you're okay. And it was a huge team effort. The whole Chinook force were in there together. It wasn't just the aircrew. So, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And so when we talk about family and we talk about purpose, meaning in life, as you say, thank goodness that big Aerobility net caught you, as it has many others. And I'm proud to say and fortunate also to say that I've fallen back on Aerobility countless times. And when I say Aerobility, of course, I mean the people. It is a family, isn't it, Liz? And thank goodness that he and you ended up coming together, because there's a project, isn't there, which you've been working on diligently, which is, I guess, kind of redefining who Aerobility is now, isn't it, in terms of potential reach and aircraft. So tell everybody about that.
Yeah, so my current role with Aerobility is a project manager for Project Able, which we're basically refurbing, and it's like the phoenix from the flames. We're overhauling the Vigilant aircraft that the RAF used to fly with the cadet force, or the RAF cadets. So we've got 63 of them, which is no mean feat to try and refurb them all. And the plan is to put some of them through Germany, the Grove factory in Germany, and the rest here in the UK, in Membury. And then we will be selling them onto the commercial market, and hopefully retaining 8 for Aerobility. So once we've sold enough to make the funds to keep one, we'll be keeping one for us to use and operate. And the plus side and the ultimate goal is to have up to 8 aircraft adapted with a hand control that we can place all around the UK. So we have so many people apply to fly with Aerobility from Scotland and from Wales, and Norfolk, even places that are really hard to get to for us, or them to get to us, and equally us to get to them. And obviously closer to my heart, Northern Ireland. There's a whole disabled community in Northern Ireland that just don't have the option to get in the air. So once we get these aircraft, we will be able to hopefully put them out at some different bases around the whole of the UK and really bring Aerobility to everybody. Rather than them always having to come to us. So it's really exciting. And if anyone wants to come and get involved, then please get in touch. More the merrier.
Yeah, it's just about trying to get this charity, isn't it? As you say, into all 4 corners of the country. I mean, it's all about accessibility, isn't it? There's an incredible statistic, an ONS statistic actually, which says if you look at the extremes of disability in this country, so we're talking mild learning disabilities and impairments up to rather profound illness and disability, there's 14.1 million people that have essentially a reason to pick up the phone and come and experience the magic of flight with Aerobility. And I think, as you said, this project really will hopefully make that possible for more people to get in contact. And I must also, I guess, make a shout out as well, Liz, to your other role, really, which is representing a rather large proportion of flyers who come from the wounded, injured and sick communities of the armed forces.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about those experiences at Aerobility as well.
Oh, so that is just absolutely the best bit ever. So that was the original role I came into Aerobility to do, and obviously I've got the Project Able thing as well now. But We do trial flights for a lot of the Whiz community that would come in, and we then obviously, based on their ability to fly when they do a trial flight and their commitment and enthusiasm, that kind of thing, we can then, because there's some funding that comes through from people like Boeing and the Veterans Foundation, we can then offer some of them scholarships to get into the sky. And for me, having started that part of my journey with purpose and with scooping our guys off the battlefield, to then be able to see them continue that journey through, surpass me and go to get their PPLs and get in the skies is just phenomenal. And I mean, Mike Miller-Smith will vouch for this, but when we get a Whiz day at Blackbush and they all come down to sort of have the trial flights, it's like we all go into this secure comms, we all talk a different language, and we just talk dits, as we call them, and stories. And everyone who's ever been in the Afghan campaign almost speak in the same language, and it's just really, really great. So for me, it's almost like being back in the crew room on a squadron again. And I just, those are the best days ever, seeing some of the wounded veterans come down from the skies. But I also helping out with the civilian scholarships as well. And we've got, again, I always said that I've worked with some of the most amazing aviators in the world, and some of the pilots I've flown with are just phenomenal. But when I watch people like Neil Tucker and Harvey prep for a sortie, who are two of our flyers at Aerobility, and how they get round some of the tasks that for me, it would seem so simple, like a diversion navigation exercise. Here's a ruler, here's a pen, draw a line. That's not hard. But for them, they haven't got the capacity to do that. So how they were coaching each other through ways to, stick the ruler to the map and use these things and draw. And it was just phenomenal. I sat there my first few weeks of Aerobility just in awe of all of our flyers, because they knocked the socks out of the flyers that I've flown with already. And I always wonder if some of our Chinook mates could come down and have their hands or feet tied together, if they do quite so well. So there's a challenge for some of them if they ever want to come and try. But Aerobility is just, the RAF motto is per agio ad astra, which is through difficulties to the stars. And I think that should be Aerobility's motto as well, because they absolutely do that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so well said, Liz. Well, these talks, these talks are called the Inspirability Talks for good reason. For me, this has been one of the highlights. It's been fascinating to hear about your career, Liz, and your stories. And I think we all owe you a debt of gratitude as well. I mean, you've done incredible things in your career, and it's so great to hear those stories. But talking about inspiration, you told me that you hold a record. Is that right? The longest serving female on the Chinook force.
Yeah. So nobody better steal it from me now that I've left. But yeah, I was the longest female to ever serve in the Chinook force. Yeah. So.
And have you taken the message to, or I guess you enjoy trying to inspire girls into the Air Force and into careers similar to yourself? I mean, how have you gone around telling the story?
Well, it's funny actually, John, because when I was in, I never wanted to be wheeled out as the token chick, as we call it, a token female. And I think, any girl that goes into the forces, providing you don't make a big deal about the fact that you're female, it's almost like negative discrimination. I can do the job as well as the lads, and I'm not afraid to ask for help. And I think that's what makes me sort of human to them. And equally, sometimes they need help. But I never went, oh, I'm so good at this because I'm a girl and I'm doing it. That's the complete opposite of the message I always wanted to put across. We were no different to any of the lads. But what was good was when I became an instructor and we had some more females come through the system, they would come to me and ask me about some techniques, because I mean the Chinook is quite a manual aircraft. You're humping and dumping, as we call it, picking up bergens and moving them off the guys, which are pretty heavy. And the underslung load stops that we carry are really heavy as well, especially we've got a 3-meter one and a 5-meter one, and they're, the 5-meter one is a bit of a beefcake to try and move. But I developed my own technique for that, and the same, we used to self hook onto the underneath the aircraft, which is a bit of a manual task. And the girls would ask me, how do I do it? And I always managed to come up with funny little techniques of where to move my body to, or I guess different muscles to use, or just funny little sneaky techniques. And they worked. So it was really nice to be able to pass those on to the females that come through and to go, if I can do it, you absolutely can. And maybe hopefully any females watching this now can go, don't ever think it is a man's world out there, because it's just a crewman's world or a pilot's world, and it's about the best person for the job, whether or not you're male or female.
Hear, hear. Fantastic, Liz. Right, well, we've just got time for a few questions, and I'm going to kick off with a really simple question here. What was your proudest moment on the Chinook Force?
Taking the aircraft into my old school. I landed at Regent when I was out tasking in Northern Ireland, actually, and we had an afternoon where we had no tasking with the troops. So I asked a few days beforehand if we could take the aircraft in and land on the rugby pitches. And not only was it great to show all those teachers who thought I'd never ever amount to a thing by joining the RAF, but also just to show all the kids around and say, look, this is absolutely achievable, and show my little brother, who was still at the school, around, and my granny and granddad didn't really travel, and neither did my mum and dad very much, so just to meet all my mates and stuff and go, look, this is what I do. So yeah, that was absolutely the best day.
Oh, that's very cool. Okay, we may have touched on this earlier on, but it's a simple question. It's, how did the crew on a Chinook work as a team?
So we have a thing called CRM, which is crew resource management, that we get trained very early on at Shawbury when we're on an aircraft, because we obviously have we're all wear a helmet with a microphone, and the pilots can't see us, so they have to ask what we're doing, or vice versa, we have to tell them what we're doing. So you have to, and equally, the pilots can't do everything themselves. Sometimes they are so busy flying the aircraft, or they have to give us the navigation. And it's a skill that and not everyone can do it straight away. And it is something that we learn as we go through our training, because, sometimes you get one crewman who tries to do everything themselves down the back, and the debrief would be, let your other crewmen do that bit, you take this bit of the cabin. And certainly for the pilots, it's the same. It's like you can't do the navigation, the radio, the retask all at the same time. So we divvy the jobs up around us. Ultimately the pilot has got the guy with the call sign, he's got ultimate command, but half of his skill is being able to divvy those jobs out. And let everyone else, and I guess comms is key on our microphones as well, because once the comms go down, we've had an aircraft that have taken rounds in Afghanistan and been shot, the comm system has gone down, and the chaos that creates, just such a simple thing, but the chaos that it creates in the crew is massive. Yeah, comms is key, really. And then on top of that, you've got to balance all the radios. So you've got to learn not to start stepping all over the radios whenever they're trying to hear something important coming in. So It's busy, but it's a skill.
Yeah. And the next one is, what's the maximum payload a Chinook can carry?
Ooh, good question. So 24.5 tons is what we can carry, which is a huge amount. And it's actually the way the Chinook's designed is that the hooks underneath can carry up to 10.5 tons on the front and aft hook as a tandem load. And the reason why it's 10.5 tons is because that's what a Chinook would weigh if it had a crash landing and you took the blades off. So it's the only aircraft that can carry its own body weight, so to speak, which is deliberately done that way. But yeah, 24.5 tons, and that's, everything inside and some stuff underneath, which is a lot.
That's incredible, isn't it? And you talked about CFG earlier. I guess the role you also had was the weight and balance calculations, and actually the buck stopping with you in terms of where you tie things down and, what you say can or cannot come on board. Yeah.
And that's something that we as crewmen learn very much from the off at Cromwell. You learn a lot of CFG calculations and rules of thumb, because when you're in a busy war zone, you don't have time to go, I'll just do my maths quickly here. It's just a case of you work out, how much restraint you need forward and aft and left and right. But each compartment of the Chinook has a centroid, which is like the middle CFG of that particular compartment. So generally you can work it out. I mean, if you've got a load of stuff, it's very, very hard, I will say, to put the Chinook out of CFG. It is possible, but you have to really be working at it. So it's not like a lot of these civilian jets you would see that would maybe stoof in on the nose. The Chinook is designed specifically for that. So you'd have to be doing very well to get it out of CFG with all the stuff inside and the stuff that we put underneath. I guess if you're ever in any doubt and you get thrown a fastball to pick something up, if you put it on the center hook, well, you can't really go wrong with that because it's hanging straight underneath the center of the CFG. The only time I think you'd really get stuck is you had something really heavy on the front hook and nothing else in the aircraft. But again, it's very hard to put out a COG, thankfully.
Yeah. Okay, this is the last question. What advice would you give to someone considering a career as a crewman in the Royal Air Force?
Well, first of all, good choice. I can't recommend it enough. I absolutely, if I had a rewind button, I'd go back and do it all again. But I would say, again, don't have a plan B. It sounds like a very sweeping statement, but if you want something hard enough, you will, you'll just keep pushing through all the challenges that you get. Whenever we do deliberate operations in Afghanistan, so the assaults to the compounds where the Taliban are, we would have, if there was something wrong with the aircraft, we would Rolex the mission, which means we would delay it slightly, or we would, if there was enemy en route, we would divert and we would go somewhere different or an alternate landing site. But we'd always, there wasn't a plan B, there was diversions of plan A. And because plan A was usually so complicated that you couldn't afford to try and memorize a plan B. So it was just stick with where you're going. If you have to wait a little bit longer, keep going in that direction. If you have to take a slightly different route, keep going in that direction. And if you can't do exactly what you want to do, find the nearest alternative.
Yeah, very well said. And that's a really good place to stop here as well, because we're an hour and 10 in to your evening, Liz. Thank you so much for just, sharing everything about your career and inspiring, I'm sure, many people in the process. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you ever so much, Liz. And
before we go, John, can you tell everyone that I'm doing the wing walk for Aerobility next Monday? And absolutely. If I raise £500, I'm going to do a loop-the-loop, everyone. So please get on Just Giving and sponsor me.
Well, you heard it here. So like, comment, share on this as well, because that's what we want to do. I want to get Liz raising as much money as possible so she can scream at the top of her lungs upside down on the top of a steer.
Oh, I tell you what, it'd be scarier than sitting on the ramp of a Chinook at 10,000 feet, which is quite scary anyway. But yeah, loop the loop, but only if I raise £500. So please donate, please donate.
Oh, good for you. Well, thank you on behalf of Aerobility for doing that, strapping yourself to the wing of an airplane. Crazy stuff. Thank you so much, Liz, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. But for now, this has been a really, really entertaining talk this evening. Thank you very much, Liz, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, John. See you later.
There we go. Well, wasn't that great? You can play these back, of course, at your leisure. As I said, they're available as podcasts. So we'll be back very soon with another Inspirability talk. But until then, enjoy the fine weather, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.